For duplexer tuning, the setup for the service monitor is as follows. First, press the black button on the lower middle front of your Aeroflex 8800, press System Reset, click Yes, to restore factory defaults. Then go to the Analyzers menu, and click Tracking Generator. Then, set the frequency that is in the middle of your channel separation. The frequency pair, for the example in the video, is a transmit of 408.4 MHz and receive of 417.4 MHz. In that case, use 405 MHz. Then, set the span to 50 MHz. Then, set markers for your exact receive frequency and your exact transmit frequency. In the example in the video, marker 1 is the receive set to 408.4 MHz, and transmit is set to 417.4 MHz. Now sit back and let Gary teach us his knowledge on loan from God.
Here we are this afternoon with a duplexer out of a Motorola GTR 8000. It's like the favorite part that everybody probably does not like doing. It could be because of intimidation, not too sure, but it's a very easy device to tune, but there is a proper way to do it, and hopefully we can answer your questions and illustrate to you and show you how easy it really is. So, as in our earlier clip that we had set up our Aeroflex 8800 to reflect the frequencies that we want to tune this for. 408 400 for transmit side, 417 400 for receive side. On this duplexer, we have a high side and a low side. It's kind of self-explanatory. The low side will pass your low frequency, which is most of the time your transmit frequency. Your high side of the duplexer will pass the receive frequency on your repeater. Along with that, we have some notches. Some people refer to it as a reject notch, which are these pins here, these adjustment rods. And what they do is once you have your pass frequencies properly tuned, as I'm showing you here, that's where your notch comes into play. So basically what you're going to do is you're going to tune those accordingly, so they will actually reject the opposite frequency. And let me explain it a little bit easier. So here's our low side of the duplexer. You have 3 cavities, 6 cavities total. So we will tune these for our low side, which is our transmit frequency. Then we will come in and we will tune our notch adjustment to reject the 417.4, which would be the receive frequency. Then when we get to the other side of the cavity, we're basically going to reverse the process and we're going to repeat it over. So the simplest and easiest way to do this, as most manufacturers will recommend, is to do one cavity at a time. Now some people will look at this and say, well, you know, but they're all connected together. Yes, they are. Each one of these cables are precisely measured and cut at the factory. I do not recommend changing them. They are what they are, and that's where they need to be. So to lessen some confusion, I would strongly recommend that you do one cavity at a time. There's no reason to disconnect every one of your jumpers. You may get a little confused. You may not properly put it back to where it's supposed to be. There's really no reason for it. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with our low side pass, which is going to be our transmit. And I am going to disconnect the first jumper, and we're just going to kind of like leave it sitting here out of the way. With my service monitor, you're going to have two test leads. One will connect to your antenna port, will connect to your service monitor, the 8800, on your 8800, and that will go in the other side of the cavity as shown. Our tracking generator is enabled. We're at about minus 12 dB, so we got a pretty good signal, 50 meg span. We have our marker set, marker 1, which is our transmit frequency, which is the low frequency, 408-400, and we have our marker 2 set, which is our high frequency, which will be our repeater receive frequency. So I'm just kind of like highlighting these for you so you can actually see which one I'm working on here. So what we want to do is, for our pass frequencies, we want to start with the very first cavity, and we want to peak that as high as we can get it. That's the frequency that is going to be transmitting on, it's going to be passing. So on the screen here we have the 8800, which is displayed. The marker 1, or our pass frequency, is the red frequency up at the upper left hand side of the screen, and I don't know how good you can see it. It's a little hard to see it here, but it's kind of the best we can do. And you'll see right now we're getting a reading of like 8.27, 8.18. It's kind of fluctuating a little bit. So this is where your 10 millimeter wrench comes in that I referred to earlier. And basically what you want to do is you want to loosen your jam nut. Don't go crazy with it. You don't have to do a complete turn or a quarter turn. You just want to loosen it enough so you can have adjustment on your rod. Then your 10 millimeter nut driver comes into play. I've seen guys do this with an adjustable wrench. I've seen guys do it with pliers. I don't recommend either one of those, because there's going to be some play. It's not going to be a tight fit. It's going to be sloppy, and your adjustment is just not going to be where it needs to be. So with that being said, okay, we're going to start making our adjustments, and you'll see on the screen marker 1, you will see it begin to move, and you will see our dB start to come down. And what we want to do for our pass frequency is we want to try to get that to the lowest number that we can possibly get it, because obviously we're trying to tune this so it will pass that transmit frequency. And just take your time. I mean, you know, there's really no reason to go fast. You're not in a competition here. You just take your time. The 8800 really doesn't track as fast as I would like it to track. So, you know, it's why you really have to take your time. The duplexer that you have with your repeater is the heart of the system. If you don't have a properly tuned duplexer, you're going to have degradation in your receiver every time the transmitter comes on. You're going to create desense issues, and it's not what you want. You want to get this as close and tight as you can possibly get this. And just for like argument's sake, a properly tuned duplexer on the average is usually around 15 to 20% loss. So just to give you an example, if you're transmitting 100 watts into it, On the average, you'll get about 80-85 watts on the output. That's very consistent with the 15 to 20% loss. So I kind of have that peak there where it kind of needs to go. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to tune my reject notch. Same thing. The jam nut, you just have to loosen it very, very lightly. This is where your slotted screwdriver comes in play. Now with these things here, you know, when you loosen this jam nut, you're going to see this thing go all over the place. Unfortunately, you know, it does happen. That's why it's kind of like essential that you don't go crazy and turn that nut like a quarter of the way and everything else, because there's no reason to do so. And then basically what we're going to do is we're going to take that second marker and we're just going to drop it down inside of that dip. As close as you can. And the closer you get, you notice on your screen the higher that number is going to go. We want that as high as we can possibly go. Let me turn that marker off just so I can see it a little bit better. So right now we're adjusting that notch, which is the number 2 marker. And I want to bury that number 2 down as close as I can to give it the most attenuation that I can. And we're pretty good. It's just about buried. And what you want to do is you want to snug up the jam nut. You don't have to put a death grip on it. You don't have to put 100 pounds of torque on it. Because when you do, you're going to throw that thing so far out of alignment, you'll be sitting here all day trying to get it to where it needs to be. So I'm looking at this here. It looks pretty good. I had that kind of buried in the notch pretty nice. Minus 42. Pretty darn good. Minus 6 up the top. Doesn't look bad. So now what we're going to do is we're going to disconnect our 2 RF cables. From that cavity. We're going to connect this jumper back on here. Keep in mind, don't get confused. There's no reason to take them all off. Now we're going to come over here to cavity 2. We're basically going to repeat the process. And I like to take these jumpers and like to set them over to the side. That way I kind of know where they go. So I don't get confused, put them in the wrong place. We're going to reconnect our RF cable from the 8800 to the in and the out. Connect them together. Now as you can see on your screen, it's very close to where the first cavity used to be. And what we're going to do is we're going to start the process all over. We're going to loosen the jam nut just a little bit. And we want to move that marker 1. You want right to the peak. That number as low as we can. 6.5652. will have to fine tune this. Just take your time. Like I said, we're not in a race. This is like the most important thing that you're probably going to do when you go out on a site. Okay, as you can see on the screen, looks pretty good, pretty close to the peak, showing a good set of number. Now we're going to take that number 2 marker, and we're going to make this adjustment so accordingly slightly loosen the jam nut. And we're going to drop that right down into that notch. As you can tell, it doesn't track as fast as we would like it to. So you just take your time. Okay, it looks pretty good. We just want to snug up the jam nut. Try not to over tighten it, because it will definitely throw it out of alignment. So now as it stands, we have 2 cavities that are properly tuned, and we're going to move over to the 3rd one. Then we're going to disconnect our RF cables from the cavity. We're going to connect our jumpers back together. Same place they were before we started. This is why it's kind of important not to remove all these jumpers. It's just less confusion, less aggravation on yourself. We're going to go over to the 3rd cavity. We're going to disconnect the jumper from there. And this one here goes to the antenna port. We're going to disconnect that one there. Set it to the side. And then we're going to reconnect our RF cables coming from our 8800. Antenna port. Second cable is the gen port. It really doesn't matter which side of the cavity you connect these to. It's just basically in and out. You're generating a signal, it's coming back out into your service monitor, so it doesn't really matter. And we're going to start with the pass frequency. As you can see on the screen, it is to the left of the peak. We want to try to get that as close to the peak as we can. Loosen the jam nut ever so slightly so you can make your adjustment on the rod. Always remember to take your time. These are just one of these things that a lot of people don't feel comfortable doing. They don't like doing it, but unfortunately it's part of the job. But it's got to be right. Kind of looks pretty good right there. Snug the jam nut. Not a death grip. Not 100 pounds of torque. Just snug it up. Now I'm going to use my slotted screwdriver, and we're going to adjust marker 2, which is on the screen. You see it highlighted right now. And as in cavity 1 and cavity 2, we want to be able to adjust that so we can get that into the bottom of that notch. And when you go to make these adjustments on these rods, you definitely want to keep your wrench on that jam nut. If not, it will have a tendency of following with the rod. It's just going to make it a little more aggravating when it comes to your fine tune. When you have a rod that's just very sloppy and is not tight. Of course, you don't want to have a false reading, so everything is so precise. And as you see that fall into the notch, you'll see your DB start to go up on the left hand side of the screen, which is what we want. We want it as high as we can get it. The higher the better. More attenuation. I'm just going to turn this marker off here so I can see a little bit better here. A little bit more, a little bit. Okay, pretty much right there. Just a quick little snug on the jam nut. So we're done with our adjustments. We're going to disconnect our RF leads from the 8800 and then reconnect our jumpers. This one here goes back here. And your antenna, of course, will go right back here. So there you have it. Duplexer tune and adjustment utilizing the Aeroflex 8800. The receive side, or your high side as I call it, is performed the same way as this transmit side, which is your low. That's what I've done right now. The only thing that's different is the frequency changes. So always remember, the low side is your transmit side, the high side is your receive side. You have your pass cavities and your reject cavities. These here adjust your pass frequency. These here adjust the frequency that you want to reject. So there you have it. Duplexer retune and alignment.